hospital, which we finally refer to as the plant, to serve the mentally ill. I'm going to begin with a poem about a fretful, difficult, tortured woman who, during a Thanksgiving years ago, encountered the following behavior of her own. But the poem is entitled Reason to Worry. There was a war on, but Sheila, face flushed with grievances, Sheila said ants were taking over the coast. There was a new killer flu, she said, and loose nukes everywhere she looked. But that bright Thanksgiving afternoon, we were glad she was happy, and flashing her bright diamond before us, laughing and turning her left hand in the light, she grinned and she grinned again, and we all leaned over ooh-oohing for her sake. My rock, she'd said, it sparkles like a high-rent fire. And of course she was lit up herself. Oh, we all a little lit. And though she said she loved that ring, the ring was a symbol of, well, she said it was a symbol of declaration and so on, of commitment and so forth. Then Harry, her intended, a combative and clamorous fatso given to speeches, stood up to make a toast, and listing sideways and suddenly backwards, leaned hard against the table with its dozen platters of fancy food, and the whole steaming smorgasbord tumbled and crashed over that dog-dirty shag carpet. A drumstick wound up in the cat's bowl. The potatoes in a flattened heap lay under a chair. There was gravy clear to the fridge, and Sheila's mother's pie lay face down by the sprouts. It was the mess of messes. Green beans as far as the back door, and a second pie rolling over the porch. It was the mess to end all messes, and for a moment seemed a symbol for the shared condition of the world. Sheila said, too bad. She was still laughing, and she said, too bad. So I remember distinctly the occasion that inspires this. There was a person in my school whose name was Bridges, as the poem says. And he died, and I can tell you that our 8th grade class couldn't have cared less. He was a substitute, and he was peevish and difficult, waspish and unpleasant, and we had to sit there anyway and listen to what I knew would be the inevitable metaphor about somebody whose name is Bridges. When Mr. Bridges died, well, the poem is called Clueless. When Mr. Bridges died, I knew the whole 8th grade would gather in the gym and sit there on those creaking, cheerless folding chairs set up by string bean Donnie Jenks, the constant burper. Mr. Bridges was a substitute. He was peevish and peculiar. We hardly knew him. But I knew that there would be all of us, and there would be our stiff-grinning, twitchy principal, Mr. Albert Kerr, to slowly stand and tell us what a deep and lasting loss this was for all of us. Now later, 3 rows from the exit, 4 rows from that fatso Billy Lane who socked me in the stomach on the 6 bus once, I knew that Mr. Kerr would spray us with a first long look that said, every one of you should be ashamed. Ashamed for even thinking about turning your gaze away when 10,000ths of an inch a man is dead today. And then would come this enormous, clumsy, freighted metaphor, and though it's true I didn't know the word, metaphor, I knew our Mr. Kerr. Mr. Bridges was a kind of bridge, you'd say, or found a bridge, or formed a bridge, or built a bridge, or was a bridge, from ignorance to wisdom, from confusion to compassion, blah, 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 which was exactly how it happened, except that sitting there I thought of Cincinnati, since we'd studied it all week. And since we'd seen it in a newsreel, I thought of its famous John A. Roebling Towered Bridge, and below it and beyond a curving waterway with chemical froth and swirling garbage bags and styrofoam. And I thought of a passing coal barge, I thought of a wheezing tug, a row of houseboats, and a paddle wheel steamer with a single tourist, clueless and otherworldly, who in an effort to make the moment pass, waved once and faced away. At my job at Merritt Hospital, have worked with a lot of alcoholics. So this is based on a woman who I saw on the street once, didn't speak with, but pulling from a number of other situations, came up with this. Nervous Nell. She spots you at the crosswalk on Tremont and Park. She's your ex-wife's jumpy ex-best friend and skinny as a winter fox. She runs up spilling coffee down her sweater and blouse. How are you, she says. And you say you're fine, and she says she's fine too. In fact, she's great except she's had a rough patch and relapsed last spring. She says it was gin. She says that by June it was 2 shots for the shakes, a highball at 10, then doubles with lunch. But she's better, she says. She's drying out now, and she's sober 10 days. She says she lay on her back porch sofa for weeks. She's puffy and flushed, and flipping her thin, blonde, compensatory ponytail, she laughs and laughs again. But it's this weird, pitched forward kind of laugh. And underneath it, there's embarrassment. And beneath embarrassment, confusion and alarm. So as she says goodbye, and as you watch her walk away, as you watch her board the bus and turn and wave, you want to say relax. You want to say there's less and less, then less left every day, and that that's what's wrong, but that we're all of us trying. You want to say that's life, just life, and if such truth as it finds reveals no more than stains and melancholy, well, it's no less beautiful for that. So I'll bet everybody here is familiar with John Berryman. Well, there was one of the songs that I found really touching. John Berryman's mother was a suicide, and Berryman himself, of course, was a suicide. But he wrote one of the dream songs that began in Dream Song 29. There sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy. And he says, there sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy. So I actually had a drive across the country with somebody whose name was Henry, and he had his own litany of difficulties. So hence the connection. So this is entitled "There Once Sat Down the Thing on Henry's Heart, So Heavy." I knew a Henry. Henry Almond had the room across the hall on Buena Vista Street in Cambridge, Central Square. I was 21. And he was twice my age and then some, but we drove from Boston out to Oregon, that tar-melting mid-July so broke, we coasted when we could, and slept inside his day-glow green Caprice, no rear window, no back seat. But it was the moment we set out, he said he'd left his wife a year ago. That bitch, good riddance. And except for baseball and his preteen problem son, that's all he had. That's all he said. Until just inside Ohio, touching the brakes, he said, I let her down. I didn't ask him what he meant. That ancient, disappointed soul had barely spoken at the rooming house. But here beside me in his wheezy, stinking metal box, he felt, I didn't know, he felt he had to talk, or ought to talk about his shame, his life, his guilt, his wife. You know, Jesus Christ, he said, but he was quiet then, or mostly quiet, all the way through Illinois and clear to Cedar Rapids. I'd driven half the afternoon all that morning, and we were resting at a 2-pump spur. You don't see them now. When suddenly punching the glove box once, and then again, and again, until the latch broke, Henry said, should drink, is what it really was. And I couldn't mention it, he said. I wouldn't. She was sweet and generous, mostly, you know. And then she'd get so mean, she'd say things, shout things. You're a queer, and you were never anything to me. You know, and then I'd argue back, Henry said. I'd start to, but that's the way it is with alcohol. Or anyway, it was with her. There'd be this chaos, crazy, screaming rage, and so I'd stand there. Why make it worse? Stand there until she'd finished up and gone to bed. And then I'd drive the 10 blocks east to Safeway, where I'd walk along the dairy aisle with pet food. Listen. I was glad to see her go, so sayonara, adios, except I missed her. I know I should have maybe hung in there. She loved me and that counts for something. There's such a thing as loyalty, it's just I couldn't take the shouting. You know, I was weaker than I let on, and that was part of it. So I'd stand there by the kibble sobbing like a goddamn lunatic. Henry cracked the door and watched a crow ring by. His voice was softer now, adhesive, spent. He said, "The socks are strong this year. We're going places." I could feel it. So though I took French, had to take French like most people, I didn't do so well. But I remembered a few phrases. And one of the phrases, I don't know why it should have stuck with me, was this: Monsieur Leblanc est un ingénieur chimiste, which means Mr. Brown is a chemical engineer. It's nice to get that learned. But, so hence this poem called La Vie Ordinaire. Monsieur Leblanc est un ingénieur chimiste. On page 8 of our 9th grade French 1 text, Mr. Brown was just leaving for work, and behind him, always there was Madame in her pretty print dress, and beside her the waving twins, Marcel and Marie. Au revoir, Papa. I'll guess the rest. Next he drives to Toulouse or Roubaix, and there's a big meeting on polymers or pyrite, heat flux or octanes, and after his lunch he walks to the lab with his good pal Francois. Think of one man pour a beaker of blue fluid into a flask while the other graphs a special equation or holds a test tube in the light. Later the two men say good night, and Monsieur Leblanc climbs into his yellow Renault, takes Rue de Gaulle to Rue Saint-Michel, and arrives back home where with 6 kisses given, 6 received, the evening begins. In fact, each evening starts with these same dozen kisses for another decade, at the end of which, on a similar night, he opens his paper, sips his drink, eats, and sits staring at a pink and avocado-colored plate, which, like a little TV, he can neither focus on nor turn from. C'est vrai, says Madame. I guess we want to make sense, she says, except here's this whole improbable bright scene before us, and we're peevish and stuck. And then one day you're rinsing a cup, and it's like the heart takes off for Bermuda, and you rise right out of your shoes and think how easy it is, how like a trick of the mind to simply be happy. And as the earth turns into a map, there comes a moment it feels like forgiveness and thanks. And when you want to dive, you dive, c'est vrai, and recover soaring upwards by thinking it so. I've met someone new, she says. It's true. And here in a poem inspired by a little scene in Lake Mills, you know, one of Wisconsin's million family restaurants, where if you sit long enough you can see some poignant scene, most likely based on alcohol. But this is called Cake. And I was sitting there and did see this little scene, sad little scene take place. Cake. She's in the first booth left of the planters. She's been waiting an hour now. She's been waiting at the Watertown family buffet with a little girl who's dreamed up some kind of a costume. Giant glasses, backwards cap, taffeta gown, which is clearly for him, for Al, who's just now arriving. Finally. And now he's seen them. And now he's walking over. And now he's standing there, husband and father, or boyfriend and father figure, except he's way too late. He's too late times 2 and the party's over, thank you, and no, they're not having. Not the grin, not the story, not the hug. The woman gets up, and then face baggy with patience, she nods to the girl who scoots out too, and they exit together. So over the chips and spilt dip, over the drained Pepsi and the big white cake with Al and caps and quotes, he watches them go, looks out at the parking lot, opens his book. Here's the waitress with her pad and pen. And what in hell is he reading? Might have organized these a little better, I didn't. This is the poem based on the 9/11 tragedy. And the quote from this comes from a site you might want to have a look at because it's filled with little gems you can make poems out of. Postsecret.com, you may have seen it. But somebody wrote in on a postcard to the editors, "Everyone I knew before 9/11 thinks I'm dead." So presumably here was a person due to go to work at the Twin Towers who changed his mind that day, didn't go to work, and then saw how he's been saved. So everyone I knew before 9/11 thinks I'm dead. I thought, fuck work. I was on the inbound 3 train leaving Flatbush, and I thought, I'm getting off. I thought, I'll walk around. I thought, I'll get a drink and catch a matinee, and so I did. Or anyway, I walked to Mickey's, read the papers, did the crossword, and I was waiting for my eggs up when all these sirens started. Then more sirens, but more and more, and so the waitress turned the TV on and someone screamed and everybody ran outside. Everybody watched that black smoke belching high across the river like they drilled a hole in hell. There was a kind of quiet, though. I stood there, a little breeze began. I thought, I have this one big chance. I stood there on the corner and I caught a cab and got the Greyhound West that afternoon. It's 4 years now, and I'm married, and I'm happy. Anyhow, I stood there on this corner by an elm tree with its limbs lopped off, and I remember by the curb its grand branches stood in one enormous heap. It was autumn. A leaf broke loose and cartwheeled through a nearby yard in which a girl had made a foot-high fence of twigs and fell asleep. Clouds were passing in a yard, and a car went by, an ambulance, a car, another car. Who's the time? Are you the? How are we doing with the time?
Doing well.
This poem, as you poets know, can happen. It was a sort of a cathartic experience for me because a friend of mine, who before I was in the mental health nursing field, was undoubtedly schizophrenic, and so he made a few strange decisions in his life. Joined the army, quit the army, joined a church that was a very strange church, and then finally suicided in his mid-20s. But in retrospect, it's pretty clear that he had schizophrenia. So this is Chris St. George, the name of my friend. My best friend said once, my best friend said in 9th grade homeroom to that rigidly grinning Mr. Sonny Sewell, whose flat-topped head seemed cemented to his yard-wide shoulders, Coach, because Mr. Sewell preferred to be coach in or out of class, Coach, my best friend said to this big-bottomed, thick-legged lug who clapped once before pulling down our world wall map, who clapped once before speaking, who clapped once before sitting or standing or starting study hall, football or civics. Coach, my best friend said, first wetting his lips, then raising his hand, and then standing and nodding and knitting his brow. Coach, he said to this Mr. Sonny Sewell, who swore he'd slap any boy he ever caught crying in his locker room. Coach, my friend said, this brilliant and lively and lonely kid whose mother drank Clorox and died in her kitchen. Coach, my friend said, who 10 years later to find God after trying everything else, jumped in front of a semi in Richmond, Virginia. Coach, my friend said, who loved Scrabble and Brahms. Coach, my friend said, first clearing his throat and then raising his hand and suddenly standing. Coach, he said, in football, in the game of football, why is there so much pushing? I had a friend who was working at Bob's Blue Plate and he's not working anymore, so I can say a little bit about him. But he was a very gentle guy, and he had a great big beard. It was a great big flaky beard, and he had like a half a dozen cats and no girlfriend. But he muddled along like the rest of us, and then he found out about Harley motorcycles and seemed to find himself, and he was so happy that it was worth documenting. So this is a document. Super glad. When my friend Sid had had enough of Janet's friendly grill, he'd done 8 months as fill-in counterman and prep chef, and he roared up one late Friday night, pulled in and parked between the dumpsters and the vent fan. It was beautiful, too. Fringed seats, shorty pipes, and custom bags, chromed heads, chromed forks, chromed carbs, plus monkey bars. But what was beautiful was how this strange, soft man arrived a moment after closing, waved, and made a V sign. But it was how it revved the engine once, removed his shades, and then dismounted, slowly, though not like his knees were shot, which, of course, they were, but with a kind of sullen, movie world, deliberating cool. It was as if this pudgy-fingered, flaky-bearded man, too shy to date, who kept 6 cats, had overnight become so hip and happy that standing there and grinning like that, grinning and grinning as he stood there in those new black leather chaps and studded jacket, it found out some huge secret. It was how it timed it, too. But it was how, in the light of the buzzing Pabst Blue Ribbon sign, we stood around him, 3 busboys and the fry cook, all of us as lost as ever, except that we were grinning with him, smiling for him, and for a moment, free. So I want to do a couple more and wrap it up. So this will be the last of what I know about French. But on YouTube there's a very affecting clip of Edith Piaf singing No, je ne regrette rien, which is, if you've heard it, a very touching and sad song. Since her life, I mean, she was an orphan and she was a widow and had all kinds of tragedy, and would stand there, all 100 pounds of her, with her little fists in front and sing the song about what it means to embrace life and be brave and so forth. But she had a grief-filled life. So this is called No, je ne regrette rien, Edith Piaf in concert. So here's Edith Piaf, widow and orphan, fists clenched and tipped forward for emphasis. No, she thinks, I regret nothing, not the good, not the bad. And you want to believe it, too. You're trying to believe it. And you who should have married or moved, sing along. You who should have done more, sing along. You who should have done less. You with the snazzy bow tie. You in the aisle seat closest to the exit, sing along. You who should have kept still. You who should have spoken. You say it, too. And you in the blue shoes. And you in the yellow dress. No, I regret nothing. Or think of the 8th grade World War map with the different colored countries and the big green sea. Behind it, against the back blackboard, there had to be some alternate, opposite map. One showing the world where whatever went wrong turned out fine in the end. But you, sir, and you, mister, think how the heart, atop its substrata of explication and excuse, wants one more chance. And you ticking softly away in the sad room over the feed grain store, and you, the lady now standing, the one just starting to clap. And you, mister, and you, the one now bringing one hand to your mouth, think of it. Say it. Sing it. Sing it again. So I'm going to close with a poem about Jack and Jill. And this is from the point of view of Jill, who's looking back on that fateful day on the hill when, with the bucket and so forth, there was a misadventure and didn't work out so well. Jack. This is Jill speaking. When I said don't run, he ran faster. When I said quit now when he could see up my dress, he slowed down fine, though as far as the view went, no way. My name is Jill. I'm 45 and there's things you remember. I remember we started to climb, so I said, Jack, leave off with the shoving. I remember I told the story, counted backwards, said a secret. And what happened, happened anyway, period, because it did. And he could have died, they said, lost an eye. But it's nice out, early autumn. And I'm hanging to wash when suddenly from up the street rolls by this hat on its brim like a hoop. So I picture myself as seen by myself watching this hat as if there could be nothing in the world so sensible and real, and I think of Jack. He's dead 10 years, of course, but yet in the plain clarity of his absence, it seems miraculous, all of it. So long story short, he tripped and pitched forward because he couldn't, and he wouldn't grab my arm because he couldn't let the bucket go. There's no reason there, there's no lesson there, not for him. God or no God, it's blind chance that lets us live. But there came this silence, and a breeze went by. And as I got to my feet, I could see my uncle's cottage, and I could see the fields and the lake, and I made this picture of all of it. Myself in my white dress, making this picture of myself in this white dress regarding the fields and the lake. And my friend too, one arm over his head, opposite leg drawn up as though swimming in place. He could have died and so forth, you know. But I knew he was fine, 12 years old. You know these things. But there came this silence, as I say, and I thought, here I am. And I'm 12, and I'm standing here. And I was, too. I was standing there. And I remember the sky was a white bowl. And I remember through the leaves I could see our cottage and the winding road and how the bucket lay beside it. And sunlight wobbled the puddle it made. Thanks.
Your book for folks to know. What are you selling your book for?
This book, leave out the